Welcome back to Chaotic Crime. Good morning, good evening, good midday, good whatever the hell it is when you're listening to my annoying voice. Or if you like my voice, maybe it's not annoying. But to me, the sound of my own voice in my head all day long, bing, 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 bing. But I'm actually really excited because today is the last, I'm not excited, actually. I'm a combination of excited and sad because it's the end of our July series, which was Double Lies and Deception. And we are going to be introducing a new series for August. And you're probably going to be listening to this episode in August. So it kind of ends up rolling into the next month, in like the first week of the next month, with these month series that I'm doing. So this is the last banger. The last Double Lives and Deception. I mean, every true crime has an element of it anyway, but this one's a banger. I mean, trust me to give you guys a banger. Like, come on, it's me. As well as that, to touch on next Monday, we're dropping our Monday Madness episode, so buckle up and get ready for that as well. So before I get into today's episode, I'm going to tell you guys what we're going to do for August. Because I know you're fanging. Is that a word? Because that's a word that I use, fanging. So like fanging with excitement, like busting out of your pants with excitement. I don't know if that's a word that others use, but that is terminology. Anyway, back to the point. Drum roll, please. So for the month of August, we're going to be talking all about deadly beliefs. So to break down what that means for August, it means that we're going to be doing things like cults, conspiracies, religious brainwashing, and basically like spiritual manipulation. So cases that center around things like that. So if that is something you're interested in, stick around for this month. So for now, I'm going to take you guys back to July, and I apologize if July was not a good month for you, and I'm sorry to take you guys back, but I promise the case is worth it. And the last episode that I'm bringing you for Double Lives and Deceptions, we're going to be talking about Bob Bashara. Now, Bob Bashara also was known as Master Bob. So this case seriously sounds like something out of a twisted movie script. But it is real life, like I always say. And today we're going to be diving into everything that centers around Bob Bashara and his case. So on the surface, Bob was essentially known as a Detroit businessman and a family man. And he was also known as a philanthropist. Philanthropist? So every episode there's going to be one word, and I feel like we've already found our word. So this guy essentially ran a very successful rental property business, and he hosted prayer groups inside of his living room, and he was very well known within the church community. But behind closed doors, this man was living a double life that nobody, and I literally mean nobody, saw coming. And I'm talking things like BDSM dungeons, submissive sex slaves, secret affairs, and a plot to murder his own wife. So yeah, the chaos is incoming on this one. And basically we're going to jump in and break it all down. So essentially part one of this, we're going to talk about the image and who Bob Bashara actually was. So let's zoom right the fuck in and find out who Bob is. So Bob was born in 1958 into a respected upper middle class family in Michigan. His father, George, was a highly respected judge who eventually became a Michigan court's appeal judge. So yeah, the expectations were essentially pretty high for Bob from the get-go. The Basharas were well known in the community as being well-educated, proper, and successful people. So from an exceptionally young age, Bob was already seen as intelligent, as charming, and as sociable. But even in his school days, there were quiet whispers about his ego. So he was the kind of guy that had to be smartest in the room. And nobody wants to call it, but we all know someone, right? We all know, and like there's the smartest, the loudest, the funniest. Like there's always someone. And even if you are that someone, not judging, but like there's always someone. And essentially that's who Bob was. So he was always driven to be the smarter one. And essentially the backhand of that was that he did not take criticism well. He wanted admiration. And with admiration, he wanted control. So by the time he reached his 20s, Bob had a degree and was working in property management. So to everybody looking in, he came across as confident and charismatic, and he liked to be liked. That is essentially the easiest way I can put it, was that was what Bob thrived in, was to others he needed to look like he was doing the best. And one other thing about Bob was he loved to be in charge. So eventually, when Bob was in his 20s, he came to meet Jane. So Bob and Jane met in college, and I'm going to be really raw and honest here. It looks like a great match. Like when you read it on paper, it really does seem like a good match. And I'm sure at the time, it seemed like a great match. So Jane was known to be smart, she was goal-driven, and she was incredibly independent. She was also deeply respected within her career. So to give you a bit of a layout of Jane's career, was she climbed the corporate ladder in a major energy company, and eventually she went on to become a marketing executive. So she was a real girl boss. That's the easiest way for us to put it. So Jane's inner circle described her as composed, as kind, and as someone who has it together. She wasn't flashy, and she was extremely grounded. She was the kind of woman who made the money and did not rely on anybody else. So imagine when Jane met Bob. I want you to imagine that you're Jane. So this is a guy with a big smile, a business ambition, and he had this polished exterior around him that made him look like he was so well put together as well. Bob was known to be very talkative, and he knew how to work a room. So from the outside, he looked like he would be a great provider, a churchgoer, and a really good husband. So I am going to fast forward, and basically Bob and Jane did get married, and they moved into Grosse Pointe Park and went on to have 2 children. Jane continued her career and continued to go to work every day in her heels and in her business suit, being a girl boss yet again. And Bob worked within his rental property empire and really played the part of this community guy. So Bob and Jane actually hosted quite a few church, charity, and hosting groups at home. So really, to the outside looking in, this looked like a textbook image successful suburban family. But I want to be clear that we're leading to the part where behind that image, Bob was getting bored. He wanted something darker, something that actually gave him power in a way no boardroom or Bible group could ever. And Jane, she had absolutely no idea that Bob was getting bored. She was working full time and raising their kids and going to church right beside him and essentially sticking to her vows. Or I'm sure if she wasn't going to stick to her vows, she was going to vocalize to Bob, hey, plans are changing. So she probably thought that she had a flawed but solid marriage. And I mean, who really wouldn't? But unfortunately, Bob was already slipping into the shadows. So part 2, the dark side. This is where Master Bob emerges. And here's where essentially our suburban daydream starts to crack. So at this time, he began to spend more time online, where he was engaging in BDS forums, Craigslist personals, and niche websites where he could find his persona as Master Bob. So at this point, it felt as though he wasn't really role-playing. He was constructing a lifestyle. Bob formed into what he went on to call a dominant household. Think of it like a cultish setup. He was the master, and the women that he found, often emotionally vulnerable or seeking guidance from Bob, were to serve him with submissives. So he even went as far as drafting written contracts with some of these women. And we're talking rules, punishments, and expectations that these girls had to uphold. To one woman named Rachel Gillette, Bob had promised a future together. She believed that they were actually in a serious relationship, that she was essentially his true submissive. And Bob was telling her all the things that these men say. I'm going to divorce Jane. I'm going to leave that life behind. We're going to build a life together, painting the life that they were going to live together. Meanwhile, this entire time, Jane was at home completely unaware that her husband was orchestrating this web of manipulation with her and all these other women. Bob literally convinced his submissives he was trapped in a loveless marriage, that Jane didn't understand him, and that she was an obstacle to his true happiness. He told them things like she's cold, she's withholding, and that she was even abusive, which we now know was total fucking fiction. So behind the scenes, Bob was reportedly losing control of his finances completely. His business wasn't doing as well as he made it seem. Jane was the primary breadwinner within the home, and the imbalance, the lack of control, seemed to infuriate Bob further. Bob wanted total power in all the areas of his life. So when I'm saying all the areas, I mean sexually, financially, emotionally, mentally. And essentially, he felt as though he could not get it from Jane. So he built a kingdom of submission elsewhere. Now, this is where it gets fucking wild. Fucking wild. Bob kept a fully equipped dungeon in his basement of one of his rental properties. So in this dungeon, we're talking whips, chains, bandage crosses, paddles, collars, the full setup. It was decorated with mirrors, dim red lighting, and like essentially it had like a medieval sort of style to the room. Like it was, that's the best way I can describe it. So to some of these women, Bob was selling it as an escape, a safe space, and to others, he was selling it as a trap. And again, I want to emphasize Jane had no idea. So to paint a picture, while Bob was cooking dinner and leading Bible studies upstairs, downstairs, he was grooming and submissing women into truly awful things. And sometimes even bringing them home to the very bed that he shared with Jane. So at this point, it's not just cheating. He is living a full-on parallel existence. This is the definition of a double life. So here's the thing, and I say this every case. I love it. Here's the thing. Some people really did start to notice the cracks. So a few of Jane's closest friends said that she later seemed almost unsettled in the months leading up to the situation, and that she had confided in her friends that essentially Bob had begun to become distant. She felt that he was being secretive and she didn't really know what was going on, but something truly felt off. And I think as women, to the women that are listening out there, even the men, because I know intuition is a real thing, we like, you can sense it. You just sense it. And if you're like me, I like almost sickly sense energy. Like I need to not sense it so much because sometimes it does trick me. But I feel like Jane had one of those feelings, like one of those gut feelings. And I'm sure when I say that, some of you guys are going to know what I'm talking about. So one friend later did come forward and say that Jane did suspect that Bob was cheating, but essentially now we know that Jane had no idea how deep this really was. And Bob at this time wasn't exactly slick. Some of his BDS contacts had started talking, rumors of abuse, of control that went beyond consensual sex. And one had even went as far as to describe him as dangerous. So at this time, the police didn't have any formal reports. Jane hadn't filed anything. None of the BDS women had filed anything. But I guess you can sort of sense and feel the tension, like it's brewing to something. The feeling in your gut that something's wrong. Like I said, Jane was feeling that. I think some of these other women were feeling that. But they couldn't quite name it. Like, is it really as bad as I think? So now we're going to talk about it. The real crack. When the crack ripped open and the tsunami fucking rolled in. So on January 25th, 2012, Jane Bashara didn't show up for work. And immediately, her co-workers were concerned, which I think can just give you an idea of like where we were at. Another important thing for us to note, to just give you an idea on who Jane was, because we know that essentially she was described as this incredible person. A part of that is that she would not no-show for work with no warning. She wouldn't just not turn up without making a phone call. It's not something that Jane would do. So this is where there's going to be a little bit of a gap, because I think they did try to call Jane. I don't believe a missing person report was filed, because I don't think anybody was at that point. I can't seem to really find any more information on if they actually tried to go to a house or anything like that. So there is going to be a gap in her not turning up for work and then later that evening. I just want to put this little note in there because I know that sometimes there are gaps and it gets a bit annoying. But essentially later that evening, her body was found in her SUV. And that SUV that her body was found in was in an abandoned Detroit alleyway. Now, Jane was deceased in the car, and it looked as though she had been strangled at this point. Now, the entire Grosse Pointe Park community was absolutely shaken by Jane's death. Now, I just want to go back because I think the community was so shaken by what we have said about Jane. She was admired. She was a mother, a professional, and a seemingly untouchable member within what felt like a safe community. And then she's found dead in her car and dumped like literal fucking garbage. So the whole community is like, what the fuck? I'm like, what the fuck? So once Bob was notified about Jane's death, he went on to give some pretty teary-eyed interviews to the media. He was crying to the public, like full-on clenched tissue sort of shit. He was pleading to the community for help and for answers in helping to find Jane's killer. In these interviews, he was saying things like he was devastated and that Mr. Bob, or Master Bob, could not imagine his life without his Jane. Now, if I can find some clips, I'm going to insert them now so that you guys can listen to some of Bob's interviews.
This is my mother, Nancy Bashara. And this is my son, Robert. My daughter, Jessica. I had to go back to school to resume her studies.
You come a little closer to both. We need to get the microphone against this way.
We wish to thank the hundreds and hundreds of supporters and people who have shown their love and respect for my Jane. Everyone needs to know how absolutely wonderful and how much this has meant. They'll never know how wonderful this has been for us. We have cooperated with law enforcement agencies and will continue to do so. Both our families grieve, and in the light of this horrific event, ask for your continued prayers, ask for your support and respect of our privacy as we deal with this heartbreak and try to cope. Thank you very much.
Bob, what do you have to say about this new Joe guy who says that he's an accomplice in your wife's murder?
My sister and I really support our dad throughout all of this. We just miss our mom so much. We're just trying to get through this.
Thank you, ladies and
Bob,
gentlemen.
you have nothing to say about this Joe guy?
No, thank you.
He says he was paid to kill your wife. What do you have to say about that?
Have a good afternoon. Thank you. That's our statement.
Did you know, Joe?
How did you know Joe, Bob?
What do you hope will happen next, sir?
Hi, good. How are you?
You doing all right? How you feeling?
I'm doing great. I feel good. Throughout this whole mess, and this whole disaster of me losing my wife, Jane was a wonderful person. We have fully cooperated, and we continue to do so. This is another example of that.
Talk to me, Bob. They ask you for a statement, you give them a statement. They ask you for a polygraph, you give them a polygraph. They ask you for handwriting, they give you a handwriting. What does that say about Bob Bashara?
It says that Bob Bashara wants to find out who killed his wife, wants to find out what happened and the truth. I have absolutely cooperated all the way along. We have, my family, through my attorney. What they did in court was a media circus, and it was unnecessary. It was a waste of taxpayer money between you and I.
What would you say to Joe Gentz right now, who's obviously fingering you and putting him up to this?
I have nothing to say to him.
This is something that you said in court. Your attorney said, you have no problem saying, yeah, that's my handwriting.
Absolutely. I am cooperating fully and will continue to cooperate fully with the authorities. That's all I really have to say.
Do you admit that you've made some mistakes in your marriage, and then this is they're just trying to finger you?
I have nothing to say beyond that. Really, that's something I don't wish to comment on.
How long do you expect to be inside? Have they corrected you? Do you know?
I have no idea. They haven't told us a thing. I'm going to go in, I'm going to cooperate, and then I'm going to come out.
You don't even know who will be talking to you.
Now, to give you guys an idea, the detectives were not buying Bob's act. And pretty quickly, the police did start to look at Bob differently. And his story and behavior was inconsistent. The grieving act felt off to the police, and it felt like he was putting on a performance. Then came the absolute bombshell in this case. And that was Bob's handyman, Joe Gentz, who actually walked into the police station and confessed to Jane's murder. So Joe Gentz was a mentally challenged man who essentially done odd jobs for Bob every now and again. Now, when he went in and confessed to Jane's murder, he also confessed and admitted to the fact that Bob Bashara had paid him to murder Jane Bashara. Yes, you heard that right. Bob paid Joe to kill his wife. So Joe had claimed to the police that Bob told him that Jane was just in his way, that he needed her gone, and that he wanted to live the life that he wanted, but he couldn't do it with Jane in the picture. And that fucking life that Bob wanted to live was the unrestricted BDSM. And he wanted to do it with no marriage and no responsibilities. So my mind goes to divorce. Why don't you just divorce? Like, set the fucking religion aside for a second. Is murder worth it? Like, we're all entitled to our own beliefs. I don't really believe that there is a God up there myself. But if that's what you believe, I don't believe if he was there, he would want you killing people. I'm just putting my opinion in there. We're going to carry on. So this murder, and I think what gets me and might get you too, is how calculating it all was. Like, it's not like Bob snapped. This wasn't a crime of passion. He planned it out. He manipulated somebody that was already vulnerable into doing his dirty work. And then he stood in front of cameras and in front of the church and in front of the community and pleaded for answers, pretending that what? He's the broken husband? Like, honestly, guys, it's sociopathic. And I know that we deal with this sort of shit in every episode, but people don't have to die. And I think that's the saddest part, is that Jane was the innocent bystander in all of this. And I always lose my words towards, like, when I get, towards the bombshell bit, because it just, like, at the end of it all, she's the mother of your children. You just left your kids with no parent intentionally. Having lost a parent young, that is like one of the worst things you can do to a kid. That is terror. And I mean, there's so many bad parts in this case, but like the fact that Bob didn't once think of his children, that he couldn't just go and live his life and like let them live their life too. So let's go back to what we learned about Bob in the beginning, is that this was all about ego. And Bob is all about ego. He wanted to be worshipped and he wanted to be powerful. And Jane, in all of her independence and her stability, stood in the way of his fantasy. Now, one thing I do want to put a note in is kink shaming. It's a real thing. People want to kink shame. They want to do whatever you're into. In like, I'm a no judgment zone around here, for real. I think, and I just try to put myself in the minds of these people, and like a lot of the time it's near impossible to, and you will never. But I can imagine him being in the mindset where he just didn't want this to get out. Like going back to the case that we spoke about, like Dylan Redwine's dad, Mark, same sort of thing. Like his secret that he had, he was so scared of it being exposed that he went to lengths that none of us can fucking understand. We can't wrap our heads around that. That's just, sorry, I just realized I'm also doing audio. I'm like shaking, I'm like rolling my head and stuff, and I just realized that the audio people cannot hear that. So at this time, the media was eating this shit up. So at first, this case to the media was the perfect whodunit. It was a suburban mum who was murdered, and then there was the grieving husband. But soon, the reporters obviously started digging. The BDSM dungeons, the submissive contracts, the secret lives, the entire story exploded. Poof. Now, Bob, at this specific time when all of this started to sort of slowly but surely come out, he was in the denial phase. He was denying everything. Even when everything was crashing around him, he was living in the umbrella of denial. I love putting emphasis on words. Umbrella. Ella, Sorry, guys. I just had to bring in a little jam for a second. Part 4. I don't know if I want to start doing this in episodes. We're going to see. But part 4. Now, this is the fall of Master Bob. Okay, so editing Tell is jumping in here. If you guys are watching the visuals, I know you already know, because you're probably looking at me going, what just happened? Why does she look different? That is why, because upon reflection, I realized I've forgotten. Well, I didn't forget, but I didn't add it in. And now upon reflection in editing mode, I realized this is an important part of the story. So while our case does center around Jane's murder and what Bob Bashara done to Jane, and then, of course, Joe Gentz, I think it's very important that we mention this part of the story because this is the beginning of Master Bob's downfall. So while we're not going to get into this side of it too much, I'm going to put this in and ensure that you guys have all the information compressed and compacted into a nice little box. So here's where the case takes a double turn into absolute insanity. I'm going to be talking about Bob's first fall. Now let's go back to when Joe originally came forward to investigators. So after this, Bob was arrested and he wasn't sitting in his jail cell quietly working on his legal defense. Prosecutors say that he was working on another plan, and this plan was to have Joe Gentz killed before the trial. So according to the investigators, Bob had approached a fellow inmate and offered money and favors if they could arrange for Bob's problem, which was Joe, to be taken care of. The idea was that without Joe's testimony, the state's case against Bob would ultimately collapse. In other words, this would get rid of the star witness and then Bob could walk free. Now, the inmate Bob had chosen to approach wasn't just a random guy. He was someone that Bob thought could make things happen on the outside, someone with connections. But what Bob didn't know was the person went straight to the authorities. So at this stage, the police then launched an undercover investigation, and what they found was pretty damning. Bob allegedly discussed how Joe should be killed and where it should happen, and even offered up potential payment methods towards this inmate. Things like assets, favors, or just straight up cash. Now, this ultimately was all about silencing Joe permanently. This was not just some vague drunken comment or throwaway threat. The prosecutors has said it was detailed, deliberate, and clear proof that Bob was willing to orchestrate yet another murder from behind bars if it meant protecting himself. And get this. The plot unraveled before he could make a serious move, but the damage was already done at this point. So he was charged with solicitation of murder while already awaiting trial for Jane's murder. So at this point, the headlines weren't just about Master Bob and his secret dungeon. Now they were about Master Bob trying to take out his own hitman. It was honestly cartoonishly evil, like a bad mobster script, except it was playing out in real life, in Detroit and in a church-going suburban dad's story. So now we're going to roll back into what our case is really about, which was Jane's murder. So that was essentially Master Bob's real fall. So let's crack into it. Once Joe Gentz came forward, the dominoes essentially started to crash. Police went on to execute full-scale raids on Bob's properties. They searched rental spaces, top to bottom, seized electronic devices, cameras, hard drives, and physical evidence from his secret dungeon. Within the search, the police were able to turn up extensive BDSM paraphernalia, handwritten contracts, digital communication with submissive partners. One wall of the dungeon actually had photos and then a list of punishments. So it was clear at this point that it wasn't really just a hobby. This was Bob's obsession. So the investigators reviewed emails, text logs, messages from chat rooms, and all of these revealed that Bob had been fantasizing about Jane's death for some time. He even hinted at a life without his wife to some of his submissives, like we said before. Now, during police interrogations, Bob tried to completely deflect the blame, insisting that Joe Gentz was unstable and acting totally alone. But at the end of it all, forensic analysis, surveillance footage, and then, of course, all the corroborating details from Joe's confession painted a totally different picture. Now, the courtroom was fucking packed for Bob's trial. Like, I watched some clips of his trial and I couldn't believe how packed it was. So obviously at the time and within this community, this was really as big as all the media's sort of made out. Obviously the media make out that everything's big. I don't think I worded that right, but I'm hoping that you catch my drift. I'm not even going to try to reword it. Now, within all of those crowds of people, Jane's family sat in quiet anguish. So Jane's daughter did get up on the stand and she broke, saying that she simply couldn't reconcile with the man she knew as her father with the monster who orchestrated her own mother's death. Jane's co-workers also testified about her professionalism, her dedication, and her warmth. Now, several of Bob's former submissives were called to testify. They described the manipulative tactics that Bob used and how he preyed on loneliness and vulnerability within people, how he used dominance as a weapon. One woman broke down while recounting how he convinced her that Jane was cruel and that he was essentially the victim. So really, the prosecutors just laid it all out for what we know that it was that Bob Bashara wanted a life without Jane so that he could become a full-time master in his own fantasy world, and he was willing to kill to get that life. So in December of 2014, Bob Bashara was convicted on all counts, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and association of murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Now, Bob's remaining family, including some extended relatives, declined to speak publicly. His children, understandably, have stayed out of the spotlight, and their privacy has been fiercely protected throughout this time. Now, to this day, Bob continues to appeal his conviction, insisting on his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Now, let's be fucking real. Let's get into Telltone for 2 seconds and let's just be so real. The man had a dungeon. He manipulated women and he used prayer groups as a mask. He built a life on lies. and then he killed to keep going at that life of lies. Now, if this is not the definition of a double life, I seriously don't know what is. Now, I'm going to finish this part 4 with some clips of Bob's trial. Now, this clip, I want you to listen to what the judge has to say about Bob. And then the clips that follow are some parts of his trial that I hope will reel you in enough to go and watch some more.
They say that what separates privilege from entitlement is gratitude. You had none. You were a product of privilege, a privileged life. Your mother was wealthy. Your father was a prominent Court of Appeals judge.
Now to the murder trial of Bob Bashara. His wife's sister took the stand, testifying she was stunned to learn about Jane's murder. She also talked about finding a notebook in which Jane wrote about fighting with her husband.
The sister testified that Bob told her when Jane was first missing in January of 2012, she asked him if they were having a fight.
No, we didn't have a fight.
Bashara is already doing 6 to 20 years for pleading guilty to trying to hire a hitman to kill the handyman, but denies he had anything to do with Jane's murder. The sister also testified about more conversations she had with Bob after Jane was killed.
They killed our Jane.
He said they killed our Jane.
Yes.
And then what happens? What do you do?
I was speechless. Don't worry, they're going to get this guy because she'll have DNA under her fingernails. I was extremely upset and angry, and I got up and I left the house.
The sister said Jane wanted marital counseling rather than a divorce. It would be better.
She said that if she got a divorce, she would lose her house, at least half her 401k, end up a 55-year-old single woman living in a condo with no retirement, no savings, and bad credit.
Just last week, Julie Rowe remembered she found a notebook written by her sister in her belongings after the murder, and a page titled, "Why We Fight."
Bob makes plans, doesn't tell me. Bob says he says things he doesn't. Can't trust what he says. Bob says things without talking to me, selling house, going out with guys.
With the jury out of the courtroom, the defense asked the witness about what she found many years before there was any evidence that Bob Bashara had mistresses and a secret BDSM lifestyle, suggesting there was more to their marriage.
The Bob Bashara murder trial, which continued in downtown Detroit today.
This afternoon, we heard a recorded phone call where Bob called his daughter spoiled, seemingly showing anger that she had turned against him.
Not only did we hear Bob call her spoiled, but we also heard from a witness who claims she lied for Bob to hide a possible motive.
And we saw first up on the stand his former sex slave and ex-cop, Therese Giffen. Giffen admitted to lying to police so detectives wouldn't think Bob had a motive to kill his wife. She says Bob ordered her to lie and to hide the fact that they had a sexual relationship.
Is having intimate contact outside of marriage, could that potentially have been a motive?
Yes.
And you knew that when you were talking to the police, correct?
Yes.
And is that one of the reasons why you specifically withheld that information?
One of the reasons.
His daughter supported him at first, but a recorded jailhouse phone call between Giffen and Bob talks about how their relationship is changing. In the phone call, Bob and Giffen trash his daughter for apparently turning against him.
It's unfortunate the way she's acting. She's so spoiled. It's just such a shame.
Yeah, that's what usually happens to them spoiled little girls.
Yeah. Well, she just isn't thinking clearly. She's citing, people are getting to her. The prosecution got to her. Her aunt, Jane's sister, was getting to her. Jane's family, Jane's friends. I mean, they're all getting to her.
Hey, Bob Bashara's second mistress said she got two big surprises when he came to Oregon to visit her just days before his wife's murder.
A lot of people have been asking why the prosecution is going so far with this testimony about the BDSM lifestyle. Well, I can tell you for a lot of reasons. Number one, it shows the man on trial for the murder of his wife is a lying, cheating, conniving husband. And a second mistress testified he promised her she would feel his passion. But when he got there, she said he had ED.
Could he perform in the room?
No.
And did he tell you why he could not perform?
No.
Were you surprised?
Yeah.
Bob Bashara sat quietly while his secret double life was unfolding. The mistress testified she wanted to dip her toe into the BDSM lifestyle. Bob called her a virgin to it all, and she got her second painful surprise.
I wasn't expecting what I got, but I had a really good beating that left marks for about 3 months. I got thrashed.
The testimony revealed how the weekend in Oregon included what is known as breath play. Slave J, as she was called, played along just to get through the visit by Master Bob.
He's standing behind me and wrapped his hands around my neck, and then I saw stars.
You saw stars?
Yes.
And did you pass out?
Yes, I believe I did. I saw stars.
Judge Fonda Evans has asked several questions to witnesses in this trial and wanted to know why the mistress did not use a safe word during the pain.
I didn't have one.
You didn't establish one?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm an idiot.
She also got an answer to an earlier question why Janet Lehman used a website called alt.com to meet Bob Bashara.
Well, I've been on some of the other ones, and they all sucked.
The defense does not have much to work with in this witness, but asked if she told the truth about her beatings with Bob, including a 12-foot bow whip, when she talked to police a few weeks after Jane Bashara's murder. Janet Lehman said she was embarrassed and bruised for months.
Lover Rachel Gillette took the stand.
Hello and good morning, my slave. I do not understand how you can love someone, stay with me, and now, as we are about to be us, you wish to leave. What we will be about is so special. We cannot let it go. It has almost been 2 years, and I'm sorry if you have been tortured. I like to think of us as evolving and growing. I am ready to make a life-changing event for you and for us. And at the time it is happening, you again wish to leave me. If in the Bible it says love conquers all, then it will bring us to where we want to be. Where you want to be, in a home with a man you say you love. I am here and will not release you. I am your man. You are my woman. I remain Master Bob.
So what are we actually left with? Honestly, if there was a second person here, which, hello, I'm sure they would say more questions than answers. Because even though Bob Bashara is serving life behind bars, there's so much more that feels unfinished about this case. Like, how long was Jane really suspicious? Did she know more than she let on? Did she get that gut instinct and look around and brush it off? Did she brush things under the carpet and not mention it to anybody? I mean, I think we all know sometimes we see things and we leave them for longer than we should, and maybe Jane didn't get the chance. Now, why didn't anybody close to Bob, his church friend, his business associates, see something or say something? This is my question in every fucking case. Another question I have in every single case is, did people turn a blind eye? Or was Bob Bashara just really good at playing the part? Of course, we will touch on Joe Gentz, which is the handyman and essentially the man that did murder Jane. So he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he did go on to receive a reduced sentence of 17 to 28 years. Now, the ethics of his involvement in Jane's murder are murky. There's no real other way to describe it. Because yes, in every regard, Jane essentially died because of his hands. There is no doubting that. But I do want to go back to, he was a vulnerable man. He was known to have an intellectual disability. And he was manipulated by a man in power. So that one's murky. And for me, it leaves me, I just feel uneasy about Joe and his involvement and how to feel about it. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Let me know. I do obviously think that Joe needed to serve time, and clearly he did get time, and I don't even mean a short amount of time. Like, he did get a long amount of time, and I think it was rightfully so. But it just leaves a lot of clouds in my mind. So sometimes I like to add into the episodes a little section where you can sort of further deep dive if you like. And I obviously will link it below as well. But there's a Dateline episode on NBC that's called Secrets of the Suburbs. And I watched this before I done this episode, and it was really, really good. Now, the other two I haven't seen myself, but I do plan on watching. So if you guys watch them, please let me know. So Deadly Sins, which is an investigation discovery, and it's season 2, episode 1, Sins of the Father. Now, this last one is really interesting, and it's probably something I should have touched on the episode, but if we go into conspiracies or like, I guess, I mean, I don't even know if this is a conspiracy. Again, I haven't watched this and I haven't deep dived enough. So we may even have to do a part 2 to this episode after I watch this if I get myself intrigued enough. But if you guys watch it and you're intrigued, let me know and I'll deep dive more. But this is Oxygen's Snapped Killer Couples, and it's Bob and Rachel Gillette episode. Now, Rachel was never charged. I will put emphasis on that. I do know that. But this episode kind of looks at the twisted emotional triangle and how close Bob was to dragging others down with him. So as of 2025, Bob is still incarcerated, and he's incarcerated at the Thumb Correctional Center in Michigan. He's now in his mid-60s and he maintains his innocence, and he has filed, again, multiple appeals, all of which have been denied so far. So it seems as though Bob spends most of his time alone. He's got no public support, no platform, and no dungeon except for his cell. And then the legacy in which he built his life of lies. So Jane's family has essentially moved forward quietly. Her daughter Jessica did give that very heartfelt impact statement during the trial. And I want to put emphasis that the headlines actually, like, this made it to the headlines because of how raw and powerful this statement actually was. She described her mother as a hero and as someone she looked up to, someone whose life should be remembered for her strength and not for her death. To end this episode, that's what we need to do for Jessica and for Jane. Now, Jessica has continued to go on and stay out of the public eye, which is totally understandable. She reportedly has changed her name and she's focused on building a private life far from the shadow of her father's crimes. So Jane's sister and the other extended family remain within Michigan, some of whom still attend remembrance events and quietly advocate for domestic violence awareness. And honestly, that's what this all really does come down to, is that Jane did everything right. She worked hard and she loved her family and she stuck by her vows and her husband, and she trusted the man that she married. But in the end, she was just ultimately betrayed in the most horrific way by the person that she trusted the most. Okay. Let's breathe. We're going to do a 1, 2, 3. So now that we've done our deep breathing, we're going to wrap this up. So, yeah, I promised you guys I was going to leave you with a good one. This case is the definition of chaos. If it shook you half as much as it shook me, please tell me your thoughts. And if you haven't already, you can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I love that I always talk in third person, like there's me and a whole team behind. If you'd like to follow me. So until next time, stay wild, stay weird, and for the love of God, check the fucking basement.